What's up everyone, my name is Paul and today we're going to be talking about my resume that got me into my first software engineer internship. Without this resume, I wouldn't be here talking to you about all the tech experience that I had throughout my careers. And so because of this resume, I was able to get my foot in the door and start my career in the tech industry. With that said, welcome back to my channel where we talk about tech, consulting, and personal development. And let's get started. Pretty standard resume, as you can see here, is on Word document and one page. And this is the most important thing, especially for those of you who are watching this video and are still in college or just finished boot camp or things like that. One page is good enough to talk about all your experience, especially for those of you who don't have a lot of experience like myself when I first started this whole entire software engineer tech industry journey. Okay, so the first thing that I like to note here on my resume is that you can see here it has my name bolded. Definitely have your name first so that when recruiters look at your resume or engineering managers look at your resume, they know who they're looking at. You know, they have to know your name in order to provide you that interview. What I should have done differently is that I should have made my name a lot bigger to be able to stand out among all the resumes. Next up is putting your address, but what you can put here, just location, you know, where you're currently located with your city and state, and that's totally fine. You don't have to put your address or anything, too much information. Next is the two most important things, your contact information, which is your phone number as well as your email. This way, if you do submit your resume, recruiters and engineering managers will be able to call you or email you that they want to move forward with an interview. Next up, I've divided this resume into a couple sections: education, programming skills, experience, projects, and technical skills. So for those of you who are just starting out in your career and don't really have a, tech experience, just that, industry full-time experience or an internship, what you want to do is put your education first. This way they know, when I refer today, recruiters and engineering managers know that you have some sort of foundational experience, whether that would be in boot camp or four-year university or some type of online course that you have taken to provide that background foundational skills of programming. And so with that said, I put education. I attended UCI, also known as University of California, Irvine. I also put my expectation graduation month and year so that they know that if they were to hire me in my internship, they shouldn't expect me to take on a full-time role right immediately afterwards. Next up is very important, put your degree or what you studied in. I put BS in computer science. What I should have done is actually spell it out. Bachelor's of Science, computer science, because on resumes, it's pretty much taboo to put abbreviations because sometimes recruiters and engineering managers don't really know what those abbreviations mean. So it's better to spell it out for them. Below that, I put any honors, any awards and distinctions that I've accrued during my years at UCI. And so as you can see here, I was in the honors program. I also had some Dean's Honors lists. Another thing that I've also put in the education is the courses that are relevant to programming and coding, just so that recruiters are aware of what I have taken and learned so far. And so I put like Python, C++, architecture, probability and stats for CS. And so these are really important as you're showing that you don't really have experience in the industry, but you do have the foundational knowledge. For some context, before I move on, is that when you're going through a resume as a recruiter or an engineering manager, you're gonna go from top to bottom. And you want to put the most interesting things at the top because as the statistics showed in the past, recruiters and engineering managers really only look at your resume for a couple seconds before they throw them out. If it's interesting, they'll keep on reading. But if it's not, the first couple seconds, out to trash. And so that's why it's always important to put the most important things at the top. And so I want to highlight the next important thing, which is the programming skills that I've acquired and used throughout the couple of years that I had at UCI. And so right here, I put the languages as well as my proficiency in those languages. So as you can see here, Python was my most proficient language. So I put proficient, and then C++ basic because I only took a class in it. HTML and CSS, just so I can have that like web development aspect of things. One thing to note is never, ever, ever, ever put advanced or mastered in your programming skills. That is only reserved for people who have been coding in that language for years and years on end, not some student who's just been coding it for like 1 or 2 years. Because when you put master and advanced, you're pretty much, flexing your abilities that you know everything from end to end about this programming language. When obviously with only 1 to 2 years of experience learning in the classroom, you do not have that experience. So never put that. Next up is I put all the necessary software that I use for programming. I should have labeled this differently. Should have just put like tools or softwares that I use. And right here you can see I put like idle using for Python, Eclipse for Python, Visual Studios. So as long as recruiters and engineering managers know that you have worked with some sort of coding software to build out your programs, that's a plus. And things like that. And I also put like Linux, Mac OS, Windows, Android. So things that you work with. Like if you have a MacBook, you put Mac OS. If you work with Windows, you put Windows, things like that. Another thing I put is Codecademy and Dash. Some of these are not relevant since it's already listed in the courses above education. So looking back at it now, I would just take these out. All right, so with that said, moving on to the next portion of things, which is my experience section. And in this experience section, I put it in a chronological order, meaning that I put my most recent experience at the top and my least recent and relevant at the bottom. And again, going back to the idea of recruiters and engineering managers going from top to bottom, most interesting first to least interesting. The very first experience that really, I think, contributed to my success in this resume is this one experience here. Being a lab tutor for the computer science department at UCI. This is the only relevant experience I have really working with code. And so yeah, let's see. Right here we have pretty much what I bolded was the title of like the company, but really at UCI it's only computer science department. And I put a comma to specify the location, and I also put the month and year to what I'm currently working at. And so during this time when I was applying, I was currently working as a lab tutor for one of the classes for Intro to Programming. If your school actually has classes where you get to TA and help other students with coding and coaching them through the process of doing the work and also their projects, definitely apply and do it, because that is an experience where recruiters and engineering managers really like, because it shows that you mastered the skills for that class. You're able to help students understand what they're learning, and at the same time like reinforcing their knowledge of that specific program or that specific learning knowledge. The next line is usually for the position within this company. In this case, for the computer science department, I was considered a lab tutor for this class for Python. And what you should do for each of these experiences, that you need to put like a bullet point that describes, what you did and what came out of it. So I usually follow the pattern of what I call an ATR. So A stands for action verbs, T stands for task, and R stands for results. So throughout all of these experience bullet points, you can see that I always use an action verb first. That's something that I've learned through looking at other people's resume. It's always important to start with an action verb because it shows you what you did and creates like a very consistent framework. And so you want to be able to mix up some words. There's a bunch of resume action verbs lists out there. I can link it down below in the video. So if you're curious to see what action verbs you can use within your software engineering resume, click on that and you can choose from a list of words. But with that said, let's look at this first experience. It says, diagnose defects in students' code and explain the reasons for bugs. Very brief and concise. And then next one is illustrate, apply programming practices to students to demonstrate computer concepts. Okay. Demonstrate practical methods to approach problems. Pretty much describes what I did. And following that same ATR, I described the task, but the thing that I was missing here is the results. Like, what happened when I diagnosed the student's code and explained the reasons for bugs. Did they learn anything? How many students passed? And so whenever you're writing this experience, really highlight the result of what you did in each bullet point, So instead of saying diagnose defects in students' code and explain the reasons for bugs, nowadays, if I were to redo this resume, I would say diagnose defects in X number of students' code, let's say 2 times a week, and explain the reason for bugs, resulting in 80% of the class passing that class. So as you can see here, you want to be able to quantify your bullet points as much as possible. You want to put a lot of numbers in here because you want to show recruiters and engineering managers, what key metrics you're looking for. And plus, having a number within a bunch of words really pops out and stands out in your resume. And so recruiters and engineering managers will eye out on that numbers and stuff like that. So really important to put that. Next up, in my experience, Association for Computing Machinery at UCI. I also list some clubs I was in. As you can see here, adding club member. For those of you who don't know what Association for Computing Machinery is, it's pretty much a club within the college campuses. They have one couple throughout the whole entire US in public schools. I'm not too sure about private schools, but they do have those clubs where people come together, do some coding problems, help each other out, learn more about coding, learn more about the tech industry, answering complex questions, and solving them within club hours. And so I put this here because I was hoping that someone who was interviewing me would also have been in ACM and know what it was like and be able to, see that I was working and understanding how to solve coding problems. As you can see here, I added some experience bullet points there to describe what I did, like observed several mechanisms to determine a solution to a given coding question, just to highlight what I did. But again, going back to my previous comment about following the ATR, action verbs, task, results, this is what I would have changed and made better. Like, how many coding problems did I solve a week? How many people did I work with in a team to solve these complex coding problems? Would have made it a lot better. Next up is the department I also worked in. This was my part-time job working at college, working in the Asian American department on their Vietnamese oral history project. I was a video editor, flyer designer. Just wanted to highlight, I was also working on the side. This is how I spend my time. Also show that I work with a lot of software. I'm not too sure if this was actually going to be valuable within my software engineering applications, but during the time I wanted to show that I have experience in working with multiple softwares just outside of programming as well. Next up in my experience is I actually put a hackathon in here as an experience. I went to a hackathon up in NorCal where I joined a team, created a project, and worked in that team. And I also put hackathon team leader because it actually stands out more if you have some leadership skills within software engineering. So that's pretty much it for the experience. Moving into the project side of things, as a software engineer, you will also need to do a lot of side projects in order to show that you actually apply the skills that you learn in class into actual real-life applications. And to be fair, I didn't really work on side projects. These projects are more from class projects, but most of the time, engineering managers and recruiters just need to see that you have projects listed. They don't really care about side projects unless you really specify about it. And so if you do have projects that are in your boot camps or in classes, really highlight those because that will make up the majority of your resume and show the skills that you learned in class. So I put 5 different projects here and the months that I worked them in. The first one is grading scale, used dynamically allocating memory with pointers to decide students' grades based on letter grade cut points. So did Simpleton simulations, Othello games, Google APIs. I think I should highlight Google APIs more, especially be able to show that I know how microservices work and these APIs work. And then last but not least, I build more games and stuff like that. And so really highlight some of these projects that you worked in. And if possible, if I were to change this up again, I would have put projects maybe at the top above my experience just to highlight that I have experience working in code. Moving on to the last portion of this resume, technical skills. I put here just to show that I can speak multiple languages, but as a software engineer, you don't really need this, so don't need to put any extra languages unless you're applying to, a company outside the US and you're trying to get a job. Over in other countries and things like that, especially nowadays when we're all remote, it might be cool to put it, but not necessary. And then movie pick editing, I don't think this would apply to software engineers. If I were to redo this one, I would have taken this out. Or I would have put it up in this programming skills section and just rename it to be skills. So this is pretty much my resume that got me into software engineering. I know, looking back at it, there's not a lot of experience here, but for those of you who are watching, there is hope if you don't have a lot of experience in software engineering compared to your peers who have internships after internships after internships. I hope that by looking at my resume back in 2016 when I was a mere sophomore in college, not having a lot of things, will hopefully boost your confidence to apply to different internships, because it's definitely possible to, get those internships without having a lot of experience. And it's because it's internships, recruiters and engineering managers know that you won't have a lot of experience, especially since you're applying to an internship. Internships is where you learn how to apply those skills. But it's always important to get your first internship and get it early so that you're able to build that experience, get your foot in the door, and be able to use that new internship experience to apply to bigger and better companies. Cool, with that said, hopefully this video was really helpful to describe my train of logic and why I put certain things in a certain format, and hopefully you find some tips in here that were really helpful that you can apply to your own resume. With that said, if you end up liking this video, please remember to like this video and subscribe down below, and I'll catch you next time. Peace out.